guys, welcome back to the podcast. Just kidding, we don't have a podcast, but we are here to talk to our good friend Christian about implementing carbs into a low-carb diet for performance.
Yes, so Christian himself is a low-carb athlete. He has done a bodybuilding show and is into powerlifting. He has a 635-pound squat, a 670-pound deadlift, and then we don't really talk about bench, but it's over 3 plates.
We don't worry about it.
Comprehend those numbers. They're absolutely massive.
So he has a bachelor's in exercise science.
Yes.
A master's in
exercise and nutrition science.
And then you are now in the PhD program at
South Carolina School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Well, we're really excited you're here with us today.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
So we think a good first starting point will be a review of how our bodies use fuel as energy. So carbs and or fat. So go ahead.
Okay, so 3 primary macronutrients. We got carbs, protein, fat, and if you want to count the other 2, you have ketones and alcohol with their respective calories. 449. What?
Said you're a realist and you keep things simple. If people are wondering, yes, go for it.
Okay, yeah, sorry. So when we're looking at fuel utilization in normal context, not at an extreme diet, we usually think of carbs and fats, and both of them can be useful depending on your sport and activity, but most ketogenic athletes, we usually prioritize fats, with usually carbs coming around sub 10%, sub 5%, depending on the individual.
Cool. Okay. So in the context of low carb, zero carb athlete, they are primarily using ketones.
Yep.
So let's just start the discussion of how carbs can potentially improve performance.
Well, if we're looking at more lifting performance, we don't actually have a lot of research like before lifting, but if we're looking at glycogen content and repletion, carbohydrates are great for that. They can do it extremely quickly. If you're doing long training sessions greater than 60 minutes, carbs can absolutely replenish glycogen pretty quickly. But a lot of low carb athletes are pretty anti-carb, and I don't understand why. That for me at least doesn't make sense, because I'm still ketogenic at sub 100 carbs a day, but that also takes into account my daily activity and size. For weighing 200 something pounds has its advantages.
I'm curious, how did you find that threshold for yourself, the 100 grams of carbs?
Well, usually the 100 grams of carbs comes down to 10% of my calories, so 4,000 calories, around 100 carbs. But I found that this past fall when I was experimenting with cyclical keto, and I'm not a fan of cycling as it led to me binge eating a lot of food. But regarding the 100 carbs, I just kept titrating it up and down and finding that sweet spot where I maintain around 0.3 to 0.7 millimolar beta hydroxybutyrate in the blood from testing.
Okay. Well, I have a question. So for a female, I'm about like 120 pounds and 5'6". I work out in the gym about 6 days a week. What would be like a good carb amount for me to start with if I wanted to incorporate them to improve my weightlifting?
Well, depends on how you want to utilize them. If you're lifting in the morning or fasted like I do, I like to take about 30 grams of carbs before and 30 grams of carbs during to top off any liver glycogen that was depleted throughout the night or potential muscle glycogen. But where the data on that's still back and forth. But for you, I would probably start around 20 to 30, either pre or intra, if you wanted to experiment with them.
Okay. I was just curious before we dove into that more, so we'll keep going.
All right, so let's start with some of the studies. So a lot of people are going to bring up that Volek study, which was for endurance athletes. So we need to keep that in mind, endurance athletes. And it showed that fat-fueled athletes had the same amount of muscle glycogen. Could you talk a little bit about that context? So when was the muscle glycogen levels tested, and what is the result of that study? What did you get from that study?
That was a very interesting study regarding glycogen, because we don't have any training studies on long-term fat-adapted athletes. That one, they took muscle glycogen pre-exercise, immediately post-exercise, and I believe it was an hour. It was 120 minutes post the exercise. They looked at that 3 time points, and between the 10 ketogenic adapted athletes and the 10 normal diet athletes, they both had similar glycogen levels from pre to post. And post workout, the separate groups, the high carb versus the fat adapted athletes, they had a respective drink that would have fit their nutritional needs. I believe the fat adapted athletes drink was like 60% fat and a minute amount of carbs. But both of those groups showed replenished glycogen with the post drink and also pre going into it.
Okay. But that's endurance athletes, right? And there's no studies in terms of strength training or resistance training?
No, we have no resistance trained low carb athletes looking at glycogen content. Looking at glycogen content in general is not highly done as it requires a muscle biopsy, and not too many people want to give up quad.
Yeah.
I don't have no quads to give up.
Okay. So I know a lot of people are going to say, you really don't need carbs, and I agree, you do not need carbs. But if there's any sort of improvement that one can get, I think that someone as a really strong athlete as you is interested in that improvement. Can we talk about why you think implementing pre and intra workout carbs can lead to performance enhancement to take you to that next level?
Personally, for me, I think pre and intra works out due to when I'm working out, because I'm 8 hours fasted in the morning when I work out at 6 a.m. So for one, my liver glycogen's not going to be topped off. I'm not going to have any food in me. So I like to use the 30-30 to maximize any potential performance benefit. But any of these training studies we have looking at pre-carbs for training, we do not have really any supporting evidence to maximize performance or improve it in any way. It's pretty mixed, but that's in the context of eukalorie and a normal carbohydrate diet. We don't have any looking at carbs for performance on low carb athletes. And also I would say you don't need carbs, but if I'm looking for a 1% to 2% gain in lifting, an extra rep here and there, that adds up over the course of time. And I'm willing to take the 30 to 60 grams of carbs. That's negligible in my day-to-day life, as it doesn't impact my blood glucose negatively, and for any potential performance benefit.
I think that that's one of the biggest misconceptions is people assume you need a ton of carbs for this, whereas you're saying that you implement 30, maybe around 60 grams of carbs total between pre and intra. And then myself, I like to implement around 20 to 30 grams of carbs, and that amount is not going to kick someone who's fat adapted out of ketosis.
I've measured directly post-workout, and 60 grams of carbs, I'm still in ketosis, blood sugar perfectly normal, feeling great. And also, if somebody doesn't like experimenting with carbs, obviously don't do it. Yeah. If you feel better doing it one way, whatever way that works best for you is going to lead to the most success down the road.
Exactly. So through our conversations, the way that I understand how the pre and intra workout carbs can help is, all right, so let's say you head into a lift with a good amount of muscle glycogen. And then if you do a pretty intense resistance training workout, so all three of us follow kind of a power building approach where we do that main strength lift, and then we do hypertrophy exercises after. Your muscle glycogen level has got to get depleted just at least a little bit, right, during that lifting session. So therefore, this pre or intra workout carbs can just act to top off those stores and provide like instant energy to make sure that you have the same amount of energy throughout a lift. That's the benefit that I've noticed is when I include those carbs, I'm able to push myself more throughout the lift. And being able to push myself more, I'll increase that training stimulus on my muscles, and ultimately more training stimulus will lead to more gains. Do I have that understanding right?
Yeah, for the most part, that'd be it. As we look at resistance training, we don't really see a lot of glycogen depletion up until the 60-minute mark. Once we go into longer training sessions, which you two love to do, then that's when you start to see the diminishing glycogen and also the performance impacts. But also from another perspective, not only are you topping off muscle glycogen during a lifting session, you're also helping manage euglycemia, like a euglycemic state. So your liver doesn't have to start kicking into gluconeogenesis, producing a bunch of sugar if you're providing a little bit to fuel you during as well. So topping off, I view it as, I could be completely wrong, is topping off muscle and then also a little bit just to help with blood sugar. And as we see this, people with the continuous glucose monitors and me testing, after intense exercise, your blood sugar shoots up anyway, and that's due to your liver and the stress response.
Okay, so on the topic of sugar, what would be the best carb to actually implement if you're looking to enhance your training?
For me personally, I love to use dextrose or a simple carb. A lot of people like the multi-transportable carbs, such as combining like a glucose type source with a fructose. So you're kind of hitting two birds with one stone. But that also comes down to calories and what you're doing in the grand scheme of things. That can get complicated. But for something simple, I prefer just a dextrose or glucose powder. It's easy to drink and easy on my stomach.
Can you explain really quickly, like how our body, the difference in breaking down dextrose versus glucose versus fructose,
and why it's beneficial to have, why it is potentially beneficial to have like two different sources?
The multi-transportable carb concept would be the glucose being directly be able to use by the muscle, while fructose is taken up primarily by the liver. I can't remember the exact percentage, but a 60 to 80 range. So taking in the multiple, you're maximizing the most amount of sugar that can get into the cells through utilizing a combination of the different GLUT receptors and how the body uptakes the glucose.
Yeah, I like to use the keto super carb.
Yep. Shout out Jordan Joy.
Shout out Jordan Joy at Archetype Supplements. And the reason I like to use this is I prefer to drink something during my workout, right? Like there's just something, I don't know. I would prefer to drink something as opposed to just pounding down honey.
well, what's the makeup of this?
So this is a blend of carbs and ketones. So
Okay.
you get a nice little mixture of both. But I've implemented honey and other like fruit sources last summer, experimented with that. And that's fine, but I just, like I just said, I just prefer to sip on something during a lift.
Yeah, I currently don't do the carbs during my lifts, and I've never actually tried this, but I think a reason that I was turned off from experimenting with the carbs is because I was doing pre-workout carbs and eating like heavy squash. And what I found was it just sat in my stomach, and I actually had a worse workout because I couldn't push myself because I was like trying to de-bloat and digest it. No, I had a bad experience, but I also haven't tried the intra workout, just like quick digesting carbs with the ketones.
Yeah, Sarah and I did the targeted carnivore diet experiments last summer where we tested the pre and post workout. And like Sarah just said, she didn't like the pre because it led to bloat, which just made you feel crappy in the gym.
Yeah.
And then you never tried intra.
I never tried intra.
And then just it's hard to see a benefit in the post workout just because it's after the lift and you don't know where the carbs are going.
Yeah, I personally like if you want to be a purist, then either fruit or honey is usually the go-to. Like that, I have friends who do it. I've used fruit. Honey was interesting, but mixing honey in a drink can get a little complicated and messy. So I just prefer just simple dextrose. But if you like to avoid the artificial sweeteners and other ingredients, then I would definitely say that fruit and more easy to digest carbs instead of complex carbs would definitely be the go-to.
Okay. Would you say like a specific type of fruit, or what would be the best fruit?
Depends on preference, but preferably if you want to use the multi-transportable carb concept, using a fruit with about a 50-50 fructose to other type of sugar ratio in it. I can't remember off the top of my head the sources, but I've used
banana,
berries. I've used a banana, just the ones that taste good for the most part. Yeah.
Okay. Very true. Okay, so let's get to the question of who should and who shouldn't implement carbs around their training.
I personally think you should if you're absolutely trying to maximize any potential benefit. Like we said earlier, the literature regarding resistance training and carbohydrate timing is quite weak, but anecdotal evidence from coaches and trainers would suggest that, hey, it has a purpose. I would definitely not suggest it if you are not metabolically healthy, not at your goal weight, or just not really serious about working out. Like, obviously, I'm not going to have my mom ingest some carbs before she does a light workout. But for people like you, like me, like Jordan, definitely it can serve a purpose. And I wouldn't say that it's end all be all and you have to do this, but give it a try. And if you like it and seem like you perform better, then do it. But definitely not forcing this on anybody.
Yeah.
If you feel great fasted with no carbs, then you do you.
Yeah. Honestly, we just encourage everyone to experiment and try out what works for you. I have found that this definitely helps, and so I implement it for my intense lower body lifting days that Christian is my coach, and so he kills me in those workouts. So those intense power building sessions, I really feel like I get a benefit out of that.
Even though I didn't have the best experience implementing carbs, I can provide a side testimony for Ashley. She really does notice, like she'll come up to me in the gym and tell me like, man, I should have packed my carbs today if she's going through a tough lift that Christian's putting her through. And she really has seen significant gains in her lower body, which has been a struggle for her.
Yeah.
Since implementing, we've been low carb athletes for like over 2 years now, but since implementing the carbs, she has been training harder.
Yeah.
And she has seen significant gains. So if that's a testimony.
Because Christian, talk about what is actually required to gain muscle.
The main things would be caloric surplus, and well, not always, because we can see in bodybuilding prep you can actually gain muscle while dieting, but also prioritizing protein. Like if there's one thing you need to do, whether that be low carb, ketogenic, high carb, vegan, it doesn't matter what dietary camp you're in, prioritizing protein would probably be the biggest ROI as compared to timing of carbs.
But then also the training stimulus.
And yes, obviously, yeah. I'm assuming you're training hard in the gym, but yes,
yeah.
Training stimulus by far beats anything for the most part.
And if carbs can help you increase your training stimulus, that will ultimately lead to more gains over time.
Yeah.
If I can get one extra rep on a 500-pound squat one time per week, that's 2,000 pounds a month, 24,000 pounds per year. So it adds up.
That's awesome. Yeah. It really is about optimizing though, because like I've seen plenty of success putting on some amount of muscle being a low carb athlete without incorporating carbs. But she's definitely optimized it using carbs. So it really does come down to preference. And for me, I just don't use them that often, or I haven't at all.
She doesn't train hard enough.
I don't. Thanks. Maybe if I have Christian as my coach, I'll need that extra oomph.
Yeah.
For now, I'm perfectly fine not using them. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's definitely a to each their own thing. Like if you like it, then do it. If you don't do it. But definitely, there's no need to demonize a tool. That's it.
Exactly. Yes. We like to view carbs as a supplement that can potentially enhance your performance. So it's like a lifting belt. Use it wisely and use it only if you need it.
Yeah, I'm gonna be like, I just want to talk about carbs for a second and like the mindset around them in this community.
Yeah.
A low carb community or carnivore, which is pretty much no carbs. We can get in this mindset of demonizing them and being afraid of them because the life we remember when we solely relied on carbs may not be that desirable. Like I was dealing with a ton of inflammation, a ton of joint pain, rashes, everything from my autoimmune condition that was coming from my diet, which was high carb. And so we might develop this fear once we come to carnivore or a low carb diet where we don't have that anymore. We'll think like, oh my God, at the first instance of including a carb in our diet, we're going to get back to that place. And that was my mindset all last summer. But I was totally fine, like you said, just doing like 20 to 30 grams of carbs, which is fine for my size. And I didn't have any of those negative consequences. So there really is no reason to develop a fear, yes, if you're following an animal-based diet and are fat adapted.
You become more resilient.
Yeah.
You want to be metabolically flexible. I don't want to be low carb for so long and then I introduce carbs and my body and pancreas don't know how to handle it and my blood sugar shoots up. Like I can go back and forth between fuel sources and maintain a pretty solid glucose state.
That's awesome.
Okay, so let's summarize your tips for someone who is low carb, zero carb right now, and they're noticing that they're noticing that their gym performance is suffering, so they're interested in experimenting with carbs. What would you suggest that they start with?
My suggestion would be either pre or intra or both. Probably just to start one of the two periods, like the peri-workout window, peri-workout nutrition. Start with, depending on your size, anywhere from 20 to possibly up to 60. And like Some people prefer up to 90, but that's a little much for me. But and also use a simple source. Don't be eating a Pop-Tart or something before you go into the gym. Use some fruit, some honey, some dextrose powder, some sugar, just something simple, and that's easy on your stomach and you feel good with.
Okay.
Right on.
Yeah, don't go eating mounds of spaghetti squash before.
Yeah, or turn into cyclical keto me, where I was planning a 800 carbs a week, because that's just not good. It led to bad habits. Don't do that.
No bueno.
All right, sweet. Well, I think that pretty much covers all the questions that we had for you. Do you have any more concluding remarks on the topic of carbs in the context of zero carb or low carb for performance?
The biggest takeaway would be find what works for you and always be experimenting. What I do now won't necessarily be what I do next week.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on here with us. If anybody who's listening to this has additional questions, we'll link Christian's contact information below, so you can follow him on Instagram.
Yes.
Or
where
get
can
in
they
touch
find
with
you?
him.
And where can they find you? Are you doing any coaching?
Just through my Instagram at Christian_Unger13. That'd be the best way of options. And I do offer coaching, but and I will always respond to any DM with a question or comment or concern.
You can get down in his DMs.
Yes. Christian has helped me with both nutrition and lifting, power building lifting. And so he can really help you optimize how you implement carbs as well with his nutrition coaching.
Yes. Very useful for anybody who is a low carb, zero carb athlete, who wants someone who is specific to that type of training and has that nutritional knowledge on both sides of the spectrum too. So Christian's your guy.
Make sure you guys follow him as he prepares for an upcoming powerlifting meet, and then you will do a bodybuilding show sometime down the line.
The next 4 years is looking rough, but eventually, I'll get on stage in my underwear eventually, one day.
Well, he did in the past, yeah.
Yeah.
But he'll get on stage in his underwear again.
Yes, for sure. We'll definitely be having Christian on again to go over some more topics related to nutrition and stuff like that. So, yeah, thanks again for jumping on.
And until next time.
Yep, thank you for having me.
Behave like an idiot, okay?